together a book like this and you're looking back at some of your stuff, are you surprised at what you wrote? Are you embarrassed of what you wrote? Are you like, no, I
Well,
was pretty smart back then?
well, honestly, I was embarrassed by probably 90% of what I wrote, and I didn't put that stuff in the book.
Oh, good. Good call.
I mean, the thing is, you have to, and like, I actually haven't really explained this to people. When I'm presenting that book, you're sort of getting a skewed idea of my writing, because all the stuff that's basically hack work, I decided, obviously I'm not going to put that in. I've written thousands of articles, and like many, tiny little reviews and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I had a really limited amount of space, limited amount of pages to work with. So I got to be really selective. And I think I just kind of went with stuff that I thought I really had my voice, or it just kind of worked. It wasn't necessarily I had to agree with it, because there's a lot of stuff in there I don't agree with, and I guess maybe some of it's embarrassing that way, but it had to have like a certain kind of energy or personality to it.
How do you describe your voice? Because a lot of people like to describe your voice, but how do you describe it?
I'm a very shy man. I am, actually, but yeah, I don't know. I tend to do really long sentences with lots of parentheses and and hyphens and stuff. And I don't know. I mean, I'm probably not the one to ask that. You know what I mean? It's just like I you know, I wanted to. I can tell you how I want my voice to be. I want it to be conversational. I want it to have energy. You know, I want it to be funny sometimes. And I want it to be smart. But whether it actually is any of those things is for other people to determine, not me.
Well, you have a lot of huge fans, and Chuck Klosterman is one of them.
Yeah.
What was it like to have him write the foreword for you?
He volunteered. He dropped me an email and he said he heard I was putting together a collection, and I asked the book company, because it's a university press, and like I had never worked with a university press before. I'm like, is this okay? And they're like, sure. And then so I asked them, well, when you do the cover, can you put his name in really large print and put mine in fine print, like those, the songs by the Beatles done by the original artist, right? I mean, it's a band called the original artist. And so it would say, forward by Chuck Klosterman, and then, put my name really small so the book would actually sell, but they didn't really do that. So, but I also asked them to put it near his books in the store.
Pilot by Chuck.
I've never actually had a book that people actually bought.
Well, I love this book. I mean, it's got to be amazing to look back at your words like this, and time capsules of your life, really, and memories that happened to you along the way.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, because I really do talk a lot about my life and a lot of that writing. And I think I did probably gravitate more toward articles that did that, because like I say, I wanted ones that actually didn't just seem like straight reviews. I mean, I've written tons and tons of straight reviews over the years. I mean, if you're writing for something like Entertainment Weekly, or who I write for now, Rhapsody, you're writing such a short review, you don't really have, space to do. And I think I'm good at that, but it's like writing a haiku or something. And I wanted pieces that, like I said, conveyed my voice. I'm just repeating myself already. But yeah, as far as like going back and looking through the files, certain pieces definitely jumped out at me. And actually, I picked out way more. And, maybe there was ones I intended to put in, and then 4 months later, I'd be like, that's not really that good. And there was feedback it went through peer review.
Wow, that's fair.
Yeah, it's an academic press, and so they there were pieces that they said these really aren't. I don't know. I can't remember if they singled out. I think they did single out some particular pieces, but actually initially there were 2 other chapters. There was a world music chapter, and I think they were actually one of the peer reviewers, who was actually really helpful, was kind of blatant. They're like, Chuck, you really don't write about world music. And so a couple of those pieces, and so maybe we should get rid of that chapter. And it was actually really good advice. And some of those pieces, like the Mexican rock piece, I moved to different chapters, or I think there's a piece about an Australian indigenous rock band, and there's the Italian disco piece. But most of those pieces just were not that good. And
I'm glad you...
so
go ahead. No, go ahead.
They kind of were They didn't make the cut.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, though, about all the different genres of music, because you are a critic who has written across many different genres when most music critics only stick to one. How have you been able to be successful at doing that?
I don't know. I mean, initially, I was really pigeonholed. And I mean, what happened was, even though I wrote about a few different things when I was first writing for The Voice. I think, as I say in the book, in the mid '80s, and we're talking pre-Metallica, like '84, there just weren't really nationally published critics outside of the, maybe metal specialty press who wrote about heavy metal, by which I mean pop metal at that time. So when I first wrote, there's a piece in there called, I think, Five Beats Per Minute Faster. As soon as I wrote that, I started getting like requests from, say, Rolling Stone, which I think I didn't end up doing a metal roundup for, and from Dave Marsh, who was putting together a book that year called Rock and Roll Confidential Report, to do like essays on metal, because they're like, oh, somebody should be writing about this. This guy can do it, right? And plus, he grew up in Detroit, obviously surrounded by hard rock stuff. So initially, I was sort of pigeonholed that way. And in a way, that's how Stairway to Hell, my heavy metal book, came about. I was asked to do a heavy metal encyclopedia. But somehow, when other people, and especially after Metallica, I think, and, there were other, Guns N' Roses and, there were other metal bands that rock critics kind of took seriously, see, more people would write about that. What somehow happened, and it wasn't really a conscious thing, I would somehow slip into a different niche, I would find a different place where people weren't really, there weren't really critics writing about it. Because I think I found stuff like that interesting. So writing about, say, Debbie Gibson in 1988, or, I don't know, well, maybe like commercial country the last couple years. I think one of the reasons my career lasted was that I had this knack of finding niches where somebody should be writing about this stuff, but hardly anybody was. And so I think that's one thing. The other thing is, I really do have kind of like an endless curiosity about music. And once I was kind of established, it was easier to pitch editors on stuff that was sort of outside, my the parameters of what people might think Chuck Eddy might usually write about. See, a lot of the stuff I wrote in the '80s wasn't about metal. It was about indie label, loud indie label rock. And in a way, that was really, especially I think at The Voice, that was like another niche I had early on. And that stuff I could go back and forth. So in Cream's Heavy Metal magazine, I could write about the Seattle bands like 5 years before Nirvana or whatever. And because it was close enough to metal, or my understanding of metal anyway, so I'm like the only person writing about, say, White Zombie or Soundgarden in metal magazines in like 1986, 1987, which is a few years ahead. I think I also had a knack for kind of being, and I'm sort of blowing my own horn here, but it's just how I perceive it in retrospect. I sort of had a knack for being ahead of the curve in some ways. And so, like in the book, there's also like an interview I did with Flaming Lips in '86.
Yeah.
Which I think was the first nationally published interview with them, because I had heard their self-released EP and I really liked it, and I pitched this basically unknown band to spin, and they went ahead with it. So it wasn't like I was trying to be ahead of the curve, but in a lot of instances it seems like I sort of was anyway.
Yeah. Well, you brought up Cream Magazine. What do you think about the rebirth of Cream Magazine?
Oh, it's a different thing under the same name, as far as I can tell. It's not like I've even looked at it that much. You know what I mean, theoretically, if something came back that was what Cream used to be, and by used to be, I mean, at least, through the mid '80s or whatever, the '70s through the mid '80s, that would be exciting. I don't know whether there's any room in the market for something like that now, and I don't have any faith that's what this Cream is going to be. I mean, even by the time Cream, changed hands and moved to Los Angeles, I think in the early '90s, changed ownership, it wasn't really Cream anymore, and I was still writing for them.
Right. Yeah.
But it didn't seem like Cream anymore. The idea of a print. I mean, again, I don't know. Honestly, I haven't really paid that much attention to it. But I mean, a print music magazine coming into existence now, in the era of blogs or whatever, I don't really see, it sounds like they want to use Cream as a brand, and
Right.
it seems cynical to me, to be honest.
Hmm.
It's also like, I think they might overstate the extent to which that brand really means a lot. It means a lot to some people, and most of those people I think it means a lot to probably won't go for this. And anybody else, I think it really wouldn't mean that much to in the first place. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's something else that you had brought up before, and I think this is one of the things that I really love about your writing is, again, because you're able to float across these different genres, and you give things a chance that other critics might just
Yeah.
brush off because they're critics. And in a way, I was thinking about you like Siskel and Ebert. Like Siskel was always the guy who just hated stuff because it was
Yeah.
mainstream or other people might like it, but Ebert could watch a Schwarzenegger movie and go, "Come on, it's a Schwarzenegger movie. That's what it's
Well,
supposed to be. It's
I mean, the thing
fun."
is, there are good Bryan Adams songs and there are bad Bryan Adams songs.
Exactly.
Just like there are good Bruce Springsteen songs and bad Bruce Springsteen songs. Um, I don't know whether there are any good Animal Collective songs. I haven't heard any, but and I can say that about a zillion artists. But I you know I kind of grew up on the radio to a certain extent, and I like good pop music, and I don't know. I mean, to me that just makes sense. I mean, good music can basically come from anywhere. And so the idea that there's this kind of and I mean, I think maybe critics have come around to that idea more in the last few years, but and I was far from the only person who could identify a good Bryan Adams song. Um, Even Bruno Marcus really liked Summer '69, believe it or not.
Hey, it's a
But
good song.
it's a great song. And Dream Syndicate used to cover Cuts Like a Knife. But
Yeah.
I do think that at least historically, critics had a real blind spot when it came to certain kinds of commercial music. And I probably have blind spots. I've always wanted in theory to kind of like smooth jazz. It's like I have
Okay.
my own blind spots. I mean, I would love to be able to say, no, this is good smooth jazz, this is bad smooth jazz. I mean, I liked the Spyro Gyra song once, but everybody has blind spots. But I think that there were really across the board blind spots for especially certain kinds of, say, commercial rock and pop. And
Yeah.
at some point, I'm like, this is silly.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
I mean, plus it's fun to write about that stuff.
right, right. So why does that make it bad? Exactly.
Right.
Well, you have, I would assume, so many different musical influences having grown up in Detroit and then you lived in New York for so long and now you're in Austin.
Yeah.
How do you see all those different influences playing into how you write and maybe your blind spots?
You left out my 3 years in West Germany when I was in the Army,
How could
and
I forget? I'm sorry.
I think almost 10 years in Philly too.
Oh,
So I
wow,
mean,
yeah.
I've been all over, and I mean, I think maybe it's just that being in different environments and being around different kinds of people, from the most provincial places to the most cosmopolitan places. You get to it gives you an ability maybe to hear music with all different kinds of ears. I mean, I only have 2 ears, but I mean, I can listen to really commercial stuff, and I can listen to pretty out there stuff, and I really judge it the same way. It's like, I mean, it's like, do I like it or don't I like it, and then you figure out why. But
Hmm.
I'm probably looking for a certain kind of energy in music, whether it's Bryan Adams or I don't know, Big Black or whatever, and or Montgomery Gentry.
In New York right now, we don't have any rock station anymore. We just got rid of
Yeah,
the last rock station, and obviously terrestrial radio has changed a bit, quite a
yeah,
bit, over the past few years. And when we were growing up, that's how we discovered music, and that's what influenced what we wanted to listen to and who we liked.
right.
How do you feel that has changed what people are listening to, or hasn't changed?
I mean, I feel like I'm a little bit out of touch with how kids growing up now, discover music. I mean, I guess, they hear dubstep in video games, or over their Facebook page or something. You know what I mean? It's just like,
Yes.
I kind of get the idea that radio in general, not just rock radio, as, you know, I mean, I don't get the idea. I mean, to me, it just seems, you know, obvious that as a music discovery platform, as you know, they say in the biz, radio's power has obviously diminished, you know, incredibly over the last, you know, couple of decades. You know, I guess what I miss more. I mean, the thing what I miss about radio that I think you can't do when you're just listening to music online was hearing things by accident. You know, you're not, you know,
Right.
when you're switching around a radio in a car, you're going to come across a station and you're going to hear a song you didn't know you were looking for. Whereas when I get the idea that when people listen to music online, now, you know, you might say, get something that's recommended if you like, you know what I mean? Or you might go to Pandora and they might suggest a kind of music, you know, an artist that's similar to an artist that you like. And I work for Rhapsody. You know, I do a lot of work for Rhapsody. I do a certain number of hours a month for them. I'm contracted to. And, you know, it's the same thing. You pick, there's similar artists that we program or whatever. But at the same time, that's stemming from the music that you're looking for. And what I think is missing from radio, and even more so by people not going to record stores, you know, and just like sifting through, you know, physically sifting through records, is you're not stumbling onto things. And what, you know, my second book was called Accidental Evolution of Rock and Roll, and I really think that the accident is something that's just missing. The idea of like finding out about music that you didn't know you were looking for. And honestly, I think that's really, if anything, what's built my tastes over the years. So I think it's kind of sad that that doesn't there anymore.
Well, and the other thing is we used to all look to music critics to help us go through the field of music and what was good and what wasn't. But you'd pick up Rolling Stone and you couldn't wait to read all of the critics' reviews of things. So then they would help you decide what you wanted to listen to. Do you, as a critic, think about how you're influencing someone's musical taste? Or are you really just kind of listening through your own ears about the music?
Yeah, I'm, you know, one of my favorite things that somebody ever wrote about Stairway to Hell, my heavy metal book, was that it was the greatest and most useless record guide ever. You know, I've never really cared that much about being a consumer guide. I mean, I guess I'm arrogant in that I like having my opinions out there, but I've never really cared that much about whether people agree with them. You know what I mean? And it's not like I want to mislead anybody. I'm just saying this is what I think. You know what I mean? And it's like people are welcome to disagree. You know, if people have gone out and bought, you know, albums in Stairway to Hell, and you know, they thought that I cheated them out of you know, some of their hard-earned money, I apologize. But you know, or any of the reviews I've written. But it wasn't, you know, that wasn't really my intention. I'm just saying this is what I think. This is what I'm thinking at this point in time. It might not be what I'm thinking 5 years from now. You know, much less 25 years from now. You know, and you can use it however you use it, you know. But at the same time, I don't think that I'm any worse as a consumer guide than any other critic. Actually, I kind of think I'm better because I agree with myself more than I agree with anybody else. So, you know, it's like if I've led people astray, I don't see how every other critic hasn't led people astray. Not to mention restaurant critics and movie critics, you know, and probably video game critics. I've never actually read a video game critic. But,
Exactly. And let's talk about the title of the book quickly. How did you come up with the title? Is it a riff on Seeger?
Oh, yeah. I mean, basically, I went through the book and I looked for phrases and I couldn't really find any because you want to get a catchy phrase. Yeah. And what's weird is, you know, there's not a piece on Seeger in the book.
Yeah.
Which is just like, I've actually written, like I actually interviewed him for Billboard a few years ago when I was working there. But, you know, it was really straightforward. It didn't have a lot of Chuck Eddy voice in it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And, you know, probably maybe sometime I should write a really good Seeger piece. I probably could. But the thing is, I don't really know what the title means. The idea of, I like the idea that rock and roll always forgets. And I'm kind of interested in how people interpret what the title means. I mean, what does it mean to say that rock and roll always forgets? I kind of think the idea is, okay, this is 25, actually it's 30 years of writing if you really look. The subtitle is a misnomer. The oldest piece is 1981 that I wrote in college, which is 30 years ago. But I think that, I do think that like music fans in general have a really short attention span or a really short memory, and I think music does. That its roots tend not to go really that deep, and I think the idea is here is a deep selection of writing in the sense that it's 25 or 30 years worth, and I liked that. Obviously, like I'm a big Seeger fan, but I liked getting the Detroitness into the title. The longest entry in the index is on Detroit as far as like the most references in the book. I mean, because there's a Kid Rock and Eminem piece, there's a longer Eminem piece, there's a White Stripes piece. I mean, there's a lot of Detroit in that book, and I write about Detroit radio here and there and stuff, and I liked that it got the Detroitness into the title. But I also like that it kind of set up this idea, that's can be interpreted in different ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it is a little bit odd, maybe, that there's not an actual piece about Bob Seger. He is mentioned a lot in the book, though. So.
In the next book.